We've reached the All-Star break, and the Braves can best be summed up with one word: dominant. But that really doesn't do it justice, as we're talking about the best record in baseball, the biggest division lead in the game, and tie for the most wins in the break at franchise history. You're watching BPTV, Cory McCartney doing it along with Grant McCauley. And Grant, as we go into the first half storylines, I mean, you can really take your pick here. The Braves have been that good. What stands out to you most?
Well, if we got to lead off with something, then I think that it's appropriate to lead off with the guy who's been leading off all year. That's Ronald Acuna Jr., the MVP candidacy that he is building thus far through less than 90 games is incredible. I mean, we're talking about things, and historically, when we look back on what he does this year, if he remains healthy over 162, we may never have seen a season like this, from the power, from the speed, runs scored, lack of strikeouts, on base skills, all of the things that he's doing. It's all in there. All five tools are showing. On pace for 39 home runs, 75 stolen bases, 100 runs batted in, 144 runs scored, 215 hits. He's batting .330. He's on basing at a 400 clip. He's been leading the league in OPS for a while and putting up what I believe Corey could calculate to be a 9 or 10 WAR season based on how good this guy is. So if I had to pick one story, one thing, one shiny object that really represents the 2023 Braves, it is Ronald Acuna Jr. and all the amazing things he has done.
It's been very, very shiny. And I mean, think about this. 2 years removed from his season coming to an end at the All-Star break, he's been the best player in the game at the All-Star break this time around. I mean, leads the majors in F4, the NL, and weighted run created plus, OPS and steals, second in the NL and average. I mean, the odds-on favorite for NL MVP for good reason. The first player in history to have 20 homers, 40 steals, and 50 RBI before the All-Star break. And really think about this. I mean, he had to be a spectator during the World Series run and was only able to put his talents on display in spurts last year, coming back from that knee injury. This has been a long time coming. And I think if anyone was questioning his place in the hierarchy of the sport's biggest stars, these last few months had just really felt like a statement from Acuna.
Yeah, it really has. But when we think about this guy being 25 years old, I mean, anybody that looked at last year and thought, okay, well, this is going to be who he is now for the rest of his career, I think they were selling him woefully short because the skills were there. And I know that there was reason to be cautious if you're Ronald Acuna Jr. last year. There were hurdles that maybe he didn't realize he was going to need to clear as he worked his way through that season. But he remained, just focused on the task at hand. He played through 2022. He had a season that for a lot of folks, and I know Matt Olson said this, you're kind of selling him short when you look at the off year for him is a good year for a wide range of Major League Baseball players. And that's something I think that gets lost in all of the conversation. But when we were coming back into spring training, and even when I started my vaunted 40-40 tracker, folks were telling me, well, he ain't going to get the home runs. He's a 15 to 20 home run guy now. He showed us last year. I was like, you stick around. Let's huddle up around the All-Star break and see where we are on that. And I haven't heard too much from that particular section, though I've heard a lot from plenty of sections throughout the course of the season. It's all gotten awfully quiet since June the 1st. I'll put it that way. But yeah, the season that he's putting together, it is a validation. It is a statement. It's whatever you really need it to be in the positive for what Ronald Acuna Jr. is. He is just showing it night in and night out. And as we like to joke about, make sure you're in your seat when the game starts because it all begins with him. And the Braves have had a tendency to do some big things from the first inning on.
Well, certainly his prolific first half has led into a Braves team that leads the majors in home runs, tops the NL and F4, weighted run created plus, runs average OVP, tops the game in slugging. 3 players in the top 40 in F4. 4 of Sean Murphy had enough at-bats to qualify. 7 have 14 or more home runs, 8 hitting 3% above league average or higher. To put this all into historical context, since 1966, with a collective 35.6 first half F4, these Braves are second to that team that had its Atlanta Magic put out by the damn Padres, the 98 Braves with a 37.6 F4. These Braves have 20 home runs at the break more than that team did, including a modern era franchise record, 26 straight games with a homer. I mean, you look across the slash line, they're better than that 98 team in almost every category. It's truly been remarkable what collectively Grant this group's been able to do.
Yeah, and people keep pointing a lot at the 1998 team, and maybe we need to do a separate episode on that. I mean, I know it was disappointing, but I lived through the 90s. The 98 team, that was one of those that it had come after a series of other losses and unfortunate playoff exits that hit me a little bit different than 98 did. But maybe it's a story about potential, and That's the saddest story of all when it's wasted. But putting all that aside, I've been looking at the 2003 team, Corey, because that's the club that set the record for the franchise, a modern record anyway. And I don't know that we want to get back before 1900, but 907 runs that team scored. They held the home run record until the 2019 team broke it. But this club is on pace to win more games than the 98 team, win or score more runs than the 2003 team, and perhaps hit the most home runs by any team in Major League Baseball history. They're on pace for 311 of those, and they've already set a record for most home runs at the half, surpassing the 2019 Twins, the Bomba squad that set that record not too long ago. So this is a historically special offense. I think as you watch what they have done, particularly in winning, 27, 26, or 27 out of the final 32 games in the first half, multiple winning streaks, huge first innings, just huge innings galore, home runs galore. This is, I think, the best Braves lineup that we've seen, at least in our lifetime. And I'm having a hard time finding any others because prior to the 90s, it was a little bit tough unless you went back to the Hank Aaron, Eddie Matthews days to find a Braves club that was as dangerous as the teams that we were seeing 20, 30 years ago. But this 2023 club, it's just a different vintage, Corey. I really don't know how to explain it. I kind of run out of words in trying to keep it in context, keep the perspective of living in where we are now with a lot of games left to be played. But they're kind of showing us who they are. And when somebody shows you who they are, you should believe them. And I think you should believe that the Braves are the best offense in Major League Baseball.
Well, certainly the offense has stolen a lot of the headlines. We've exhausted a ton of oxygen talking about them. But Spencer Strider, when we talk about first half storylines, he had the MLB best 166 strikeouts, on pace for 313, which of course be a modern day Braves record. It would be the first 300 seasons strikeout total since Garrett Cole in 2019. A year ago, he was second in the NL Rookie of the Year voting. He had a 38.3% strikeout rate. I didn't expect that to drop off, but I did think maybe there would be adjustments and that maybe that rate wouldn't be at the same level. Grant, it's better. He's fanning batters at a 38.9% clip. The four-seam slider, changeup, every one of them has a higher whiff rate than it did a year ago. He's using that changeup at a higher rate now. He's still kind of just sprinkling it in there like he's Salt Bay at 7.7%, but he's been even better with that pitch. Consider this. Strider has 6 games of 10 or more strikeouts, equal to what he had last season. And in Braves history, only one player has had more. John Smoltz with 12 in 1996. Strider, a very strong bet to run that down.
Well, the 1996 John Smoltz season is going to come up a lot. And I went back and looked because John Smoltz, in that 96 season, when he set the modern franchise record with the 276 strikeouts, he had the most at the All-Star break as well. He started 2 more games than Spencer Strider did. He threw 30 more innings than Spencer Strider did. And all Spencer Strider was able to accomplish was to come up with let's look at 166 strikeouts to Smoltz's 149 strikeouts. So you give him about 70 more innings, he could pass Smoltz. You give him about 80 plus innings, 84 innings, I believe, by my math, at 14.3 strikeouts per 9, he could get to that 300 strikeout season. That could definitely happen. And I went digging around because when you're striking out 14 plus batters per 9, you got to be doing something that at the All-Star break for a starting pitcher is hard to do. Jacob deGrom set the record in 2021. He had 15 starts, 14.28 strikeouts per 9. Strider in 17 starts, 14.27, just 1/100th of a point off of Jacob deGrom's record set for a qualified starting pitcher at the All-Star break in Ks per 9. And if he hadn't gone out for the 7th inning in Tampa Bay and gotten a fly out before he left, he had deGrom by percentage points. But either way, when you're rubbing shoulders with Jacob deGrom and John Smoltz, and you're just a runner-up in the Rookie of the Year award, let's go ahead and just bask in the greatness and the glory of what Spencer Strider is as a strikeout pitcher, because we don't see guys like this too often.
Yeah, and all collectively, it goes into a Braves team that's up at MLB best 8.5 games in a division where, I mean, nobody spent more money in the offseason than the Mets. They're a whopping 18.5 games back. The Phillies made noise as well. They're 12 games back. I think when you consider major first half storylines, I think the division deficit that these other teams are facing, this is simply a storyline that nobody saw coming.
That's huge. And look at the team that's in second place. It's the Miami Marlins. I've been using 2 words to describe them. One is surprising because, again, who expected this after the off seasons that both the Mets and the Phillies had? And we got a lot of questions about, well, did the Braves do enough to distance themselves from a Mets team that won 101 games and a Phillies team that knocked the Braves out of the playoffs and went all the way to the World Series? And I think those are valid questions, but I also kept looking at this roster and I thought, okay, well, yeah, you could add some other players, but they've got a payroll that has finally crept up into that top 10. They've gotten into the luxury tax threshold, and then you start to look around at what they have and what they needed. And the Braves, unlike some of these other teams, I feel like they didn't have to make a splash. Now, I will stipulate they could make a splash. It may happen at some point. I don't know. But putting all of that aside, there seemed to be a lot of work for other teams to do to catch up with the standard that the Braves have set. But the Miami Marlins went out and made some nice little pickups, some veteran pickups. They've got good pitching, and they're winning some close games. And while they have not been able to beat the Atlanta Braves very much, they've kind of changed the complexion of what the NL East looks like and what the wild card race could be looking like. They could be doing some buying in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, the Mets, if you base it off of Steve Cohen's recent press conference, they may have a very tough decision if they don't do a whole bunch of winning before the month of July is over. It's a very, very different National League East than I expected coming into the year.
Yeah, certainly a surprise is the optimum word there. And when it comes to first half surprises for this Braves team, Bryce Elder certainly qualifies, earning his first All-Star nod with a top 5 ERA in the NL at 2.97 over his 17 starts. This is a guy that didn't even make the opening day rotation. He's been a godsend for his staff down Max Fried and Kyle Wright. But I'll say, when you think about extreme surprises for this team, I did not expect what we have seen offensively from Sean Murphy. He had 17 home runs. He's one away from his career best of 18 a year ago. His slash line is at career highs at every step. His OPS is more than 170 points higher than in any of his full big league seasons. The defense was undeniable when he was in Oakland, and obviously we're seeing that in Atlanta. 14 base runners have been thrown out by Murphy so far. That's one on the NL lead, despite Murphy playing in the fewest games of any of those guys who have 15. That includes 17 less than the Phillies' JT Muto. I mean, it's all been spectacular, but I did not, Grant, expect the all-star turn offensively that we've seen out of Murphy, who will be the NL starter and the Midsummer Classic behind the plate.
Yeah, I'm not about to sit here with a big grin on my face and say, I told you so, but we did talk about what it could mean for Sean Murphy to get out of the Coliseum in Oakland and start playing in a friendlier ballpark and in a better lineup. And we're just seeing that play out, but he has far exceeded even the most optimistic expectations or hopes of what he would be as an offensive player. Now, can he keep this up over the course of the whole contract? I don't know, but I can tell you this, he has definitely benefited from what the Braves do, their approach, and from being in a much better situation all around. And he is just feasting on pitching. It doesn't matter who it is, National League, American League, home, away, he's doing it all. And the Braves catching duo between d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy, they've combined for 25 home runs in the first half. That is far and away the most home runs by a catching duo or catcher's position for any team in Major League Baseball. You mentioned Murphy is closing in on his single season record. He is leading all Major League Baseball catchers in home runs. He's second in runs batted in, leading the National League. It's just been an incredible showing for Sean in this first half, and it is very appropriate that he was voted the starter in the National League for the All-Star game at catcher, because I think he is the best catcher in the National League. And I don't know that we need to really open it up for debate at this point. He has been that far and away much better all around than any other catcher in the game, especially in the National League.
Well, it's all been extremely good across the page for the Braves. And as we turn the page to the second half, I mean, things had the potential to get even better for the NL East leaders in terms of a rotation that ranks third in ERA, top 10 in F4, that much closer to getting Max Fried back after his rehab start with the Gwinnett over the weekend. Fried threw 35 pitches as he works his way back from that forearm strain, touched 96 with the fastball. Meanwhile, Kyle Wright expected to be back in late August, and a team that's gone 25-7 since June 1st without Fried and Wright could shore up what's been one of the very few concerns here, because I mentioned the overall ranks, and Michael Soroka's last 2 starts have been better and better, but in 23 starts made by arms other than Strider, Morton, and Elder since Fried and Wright went down, a 5.38 ERA. How much better can this rotation get when Fried returns and Wright later? I mean, I think that's going to be fascinating.
Well, we know who those guys are. And if they come back and they're healthy, it's a stabilizing force at the very least. I mean, I've seen different ideas that, okay, well, maybe the Braves should go out and make a trade for a starting pitcher. And we don't need to insert joke. It's like making a trade without having to actually do it when you get Fried back. But I mean, you look at what he has been over the last 4 years for this Braves team. It's going to mean a lot to put him back in that rotation. Even if he's still kind of easing his way back in for the first handful of starts, it's going to help stabilize things. And he does have front of the rotation, ace level stuff. And he does have postseason experience. So it takes a club that has done plenty of winning without him, maybe despite some of the arms that they've had to kind of cobble together and utilize to get the starting rotation through, and thus help the bullpen to get through all of this. Not to bury the lead on that, because the bullpen's also been great since June the 1st. But getting Max Fried back is going to be an impact. Whatever Alex Anthopoulos does at the deadline, I would think that Fried's return is going to be a factor in what he's going to be looking for. And then keeping in mind that you do have Kyle Wright potentially in August to come back in and further supplement your rotation. So I'm interested to see what the second half holds. I'm interested to see what the trade deadline holds, but there are not a lot of clubs that can look around and have the best record in baseball. There's only one. And also realize that two of their best starting pitchers could be rejoining the fray, and that they've done all of this in the first half with only 10 starts combined between those two guys. That's another amazing thing that we saw in the first half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does dovetail into this conversation because the offense is the NL's best in tops. As we mentioned, you can argue in all of baseball. They lead in so many categories. The bullpen leads the majors in ERA, fourth in WHIP. The rotation, I mean, it looks like it's only going to get better. I've mentioned the possibility at the deadline of a veteran innings eater if they want to go that route. I mean, if there's concerns with Fried and Wright as they work their way back, certainly maybe they do end up going that route, or if they just want some depth. Further relief help, I think, is always an option there. I just don't know if there's any kind of splash coming, because I think any maneuvers that this team makes feels like they're probably going to be minimal when we talk about that August 1st deadline.
Yeah, and again, and I know it's not the most exciting thing, and I'm not trying to set people up for disappointment because I have no idea what Alex Anthopoulos will do. I didn't expect him to go get Raisel Iglesias last year. I didn't really know what to expect when he remade the outfield in 2021. I mean, these things play out beyond just the immediacy of, okay, this trade has been announced. What does it mean? And you give the grade. It's kind of like we just saw with the draft. I mean, a lot of people will look at these players and immediately try to decide if this was a win or a loss for the club. It sometimes takes a little time. Fortunately, with the deadline, it seems to impact it a little bit quicker. But putting that aside, this is a club that needs finishing touches. This is not a club that has to go out and trade for 2 or 3 major players in order to get themselves where they want to go. Now, the popular thought would be, of course, you just take a great club and make it even better by going out and getting some of these players, and you might. I don't know that the Braves farm system has enough to go out and make the biggest moves of all come the trade deadline, but I know Alex Anthopoulos has figured out ways to take these trade chips and cash them in for the right players that his team needs, and I would expect that he's already done plenty of legwork leading up to the next couple of weeks in that August 1st trade deadline.
Well, obviously the goal for this team is another division title. And during this streak, the Braves' biggest win in terms of the division was 8 games in the first year, 2018, when they won that over the Nationals. They've had bigger leads during this stretch, Grant, including 10.5 games in 2019. They were up by as many as 9.5 games during that 2018 season. The Marlins, as you mentioned, are in second place. The Braves are 9-1 against them. We saw last season when the Braves were 10.5 games back in the division. No lead is insurmountable. But a double-sided question for you. Can anyone catch this team in the division? And how many games is this team going to end up winning?
Well, the games the team's going to end up winning, I think, is, again, I said they're on pace for 110. Can they get there? I believe that they can. Can they surpass the 106 wins of the 98 team? I believe that they can. And so that starts to create a math equation for the Marlins to solve for X or Y, whatever the case is, in having to play at a 750 clip over the course of the rest of the season to catch up with them. Because if you didn't already get started and you just watched the month of June that the Braves put up, I mean, the Phillies went on a nice run. The Marlins have been playing some good baseball. The Mets, it was kind of hit or miss for them. They got hot a little bit lately, but otherwise, these teams that played some of their best baseball all season, they lost ground to the Atlanta Braves over the course of the month of June, especially. So I'm just not ready to say that there's a team that can go out there and run down the Atlanta Braves. I mean, it would involve the Braves falling flat on their face, down a flight of stairs, staggering up, hitting their knee on the coffee table, and then somehow collapsing out of the front porch and rolling out onto their lawn. That's the kind of comedy of errors we talk about for the Braves to not win the division here. So putting all of that aside, it's going to be tough. But the optimal goal, to kind of go back to what you were saying, yeah, the Braves do want to win the division. That's the first box they like to check. Then they want to go on to making that run through October that they were denied a year ago through, I think, just some unfortunate timing for Max Fried being sick, for Spencer Strider coming off an injury, just unable to be the hot team at the right time of the year. That's something that the Braves want to try to tap into this year. They're built for that. They've got I think the overall personnel for that. Maybe it gets better in the trade deadline, or maybe we're just looking at one of the best constructed teams with the proper amount of depth that it needs to do what it needs to do come October. But we're going to find all that out in about 3 months. So we'll see how it all plays out. But to make a long story as short as I possibly can, or to put a bow on it, I'm just not sure that there's a team powerful enough to catch the Atlanta Braves at this point, regardless of what the math says on an 8.5 game lead. Corey, it just feels bigger than that.
Yeah, and they're only going to see the Marlins 3 more times. So Miami is going to need help. And I just don't see that coming. Based on remaining opponents' winning percentage, the Braves slate is 23rd. And they have the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks co-leaders in the West. But the Braves have 7 against the Nationals, 7 against the Pirates, 7 against the floundering Mets. So look, they may not take down 2018 for the biggest margin of victory in the division during this title streak, but I think it's a very real possibility, as you said, is this team getting that 98 teams record of 106 wins. I think they're going to leave that one in the absolute rear view. After the All-Star Game festivities, where the Braves will be well represented, the second half gets started with a 6-game homestand. That begins Friday against the White Sox. Don't forget, we'll always have you covered here on BPTV. So make sure to subscribe, turn notifications, and be sure to tell a friend as we keep this community growing. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Graham McCauley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.